Good afternoon. Hello everybody. 안녕하세요. So we are here today. We have the fifth lecture in this series of lectures on the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch Huineng. All of you should have a copy of this book in front of you. Last month, when I gave the talk, I introduced this book, which is a newly edited version of the Platform Sutra. It's been edited by Zen Master De Kuang and Zen Master De Kuan from Hong Kong, and it's a completely newly edited version, very nice English, very easy to understand, much better than the older editions, and I hope that you all will be able to follow this well and get a copy of this book eventually. It should be published soon by Shambhala. But I don't want to talk about just this book today. Actually, what we want to talk about is the contents of the book, and the chapter that we're on now is chapter 5, which is titled Dhyana, Dhyana. So, what is a dhyana? Now you notice in this book there's Chinese in the front, so if you happen to be Chinese, you can also follow this in Chinese. But most of you don't look like you're Chinese, so you can follow it in English in the second part of the book, chapter 5, Dhyana. And dhyana, what's the meaning of the word dhyana? Dhyana means a meditation. The Indian word, the Pali word is dhyana. The Sanskrit is dhyana, and the Korean word is a sun. Japanese word is a zen. Chinese is a chan. So here we see finally the Sixth Patriarch, he brings us to the subject of meditation. So far in this book, he hasn't talked about meditation as much as wisdom. So in previous chapters, he talked about wisdom and how to take away views that were incorrect views, and how to take away our attachments and many things like that. But here he talks about meditation. So this is a very important chapter. It's very short but important chapter. As you notice, it's not a very long chapter. And he starts off by talking about meditation means not dwelling on the mind, nor upon purity. Also, we do not approve of non-activity. Okay. So, what does that mean? We all tend to, sometimes when we undertake some kind of spiritual activity, tend to think about one of those two things, the mind or purity. Well, many people, when they undertake some kind of spiritual path, they approach it like psychology. They think about the mind. What is a clear mind? What's a not moving mind? They approach it like a psychologist. They think about the mind and they look at things from the psychological point of view. Then another way that people approach it is not to think about the mind, but to think about purity. So one kind of meditation that's very popular in Asia is to examine the impurity of all things. If you go to places like Burma or Thailand, then you will learn some meditation where they teach you to first of all understand the impermanence of all things. that things are all changing, and then the impurity of all things, that all things are inherently impure. And of course, if we dwell on the impurity of all things, we get to the point where we want to find what is pure. We want to understand what is pure, and we seek that which is pure and which is bright and clear. So these two kind of very common kind of meditations are, in some way, are both flawed, because they are both in the realm of opposites. By dwelling on impurity, we set up an opposite between what is pure. By dwelling on the mind, we also set up an opposite on what's not the mind. And so the sixth patriarch, he says, don't dwell, true meditation is not dwelling on the mind, nor upon purity. And this may surprise people, because many people may feel like, well, we should find out what's really pure and what's the truly clear mind. But here he's talking about meditation in a very broad sense. And he's saying if you dwell on the mind, or you dwell on the purity, you fall into the realm of opposites. And he says we don't approve of non-activity. So he doesn't approve of just sitting still like a tree or a rock. Many people think that's meditation, just sitting still. Just sitting and you are Buddha. Just sitting and you are holy. But he doesn't approve of that. So in this teaching, what he sets forth is a very kind of a way that he can take away the delusion that everybody has. He sets forth a path that's not easy to find, but this is a path to take away most of the delusive ideas that people have. And he says if you take away your delusive ideas, then there will be nothing but purity. That is our nature. So rather than dwell on purity, he suggests that you examine your delusions, take away your delusions. So this is not so simple to understand. Even I explain this. As I hear myself explaining this, I get confused. It's really not so easy for us to relate to our modern situation. So I want to talk about something that happened yesterday and has been happening for now 3 months now. And maybe we can relate it to this. I went with a group of Korean people yesterday to the West Coast, the West Coast city of Taean. And I went to the ocean to clean from the oil spill that happened. And as many of you know, there was a very serious oil spill about 3 months ago, maybe 2.5 months ago. In November, there was a very serious oil spill on the west coast of Korea, and maybe 1/4 or 1/3 of the oil that spilled when the Exxon Valdez had that famous accident in Alaska spilled on the west coast. And many people have been going there to do good work, to do volunteer work, to clean the oil off the rocks and to clean the oil from the sea. And it's quite an ecological disaster, of course. If you go to the beach there, everything's dead. There's no crabs, there's no snails crawling around, it's dead. And when you dig deep into the sand or deep under the rocks, there's oil. It's like there's this shiny, crude oil just deep in the rock, under the rocks. So a group of our members of our Musangsa temple and also the other local Buddhists, we all got together and we rented a bus. We went down in the early morning and we went to the beach, and we got very prepared. They have the best kind of, you put on this jumpsuit that you zipper up, and you're completely covered with a hood, and you look like you're an astronaut. Everybody's in these white suits, and they're all, zippered up. Then they got their gloves, and they got their mask, and not only adults, but many kids coming out, their children coming. It was a beautiful day, and we all went out there, and we had all this high-tech gear, the boots and everything, but our cleaning was very low-tech. The only way to clean is to take these old rags and towels and get down on your hands and knees and start scrubbing the oil, sponging the oil up from the sand, and sponging it from the rock. There's no really high-tech way of doing it. You can't spray a chemical into the oil that will destroy the oil without also, again, hurting the environment. So while we're doing this, the absurdity of it really, I think everybody had a good intention to clean it, but people, I noticed, they soon got tired of doing this. They soon got very exhausted from trying to clean this oil out, the kind of absurdity of it, even though we understood it was right to clean it and to purify this environment. But it's kind of like, you dig down and like you find some oil and you're sort of happy you found some oil. Well, maybe I'll soak this up and put it in my car. But it's not that simple. It doesn't work that way. But as I was doing that, I realized that if we just clean, when we're cleaning, we just clean. And we don't think about this is good or bad oil. This oil is good, this oil is bad, this oil is pure, this oil is impure. We can get our job done. If we start to think about how bad the oil is, what a disaster it is, soon we feel bad. We don't want to breathe in even the smell of that oil. We're afraid of it. We're scared even to clean it up. But if we don't set up that kind of argument, we don't argue. We just, with compassion, wipe the oil off the rocks. With compassion for all the creatures that live there, dig the oil out. Then we can get our job done. So we need to have a kind of a broader view. When we read a sutra like this, we also need to have a broader view. The Master Huideng said these things with compassion. He didn't say these things just for the sake of argument. So he said, don't dwell on purity, because when you dwell on purity, when you dwell on a pure, pristine environment, then you make a dirty environment. When you make a dirty environment, you don't feel good, and you start to find fault with yourself and everybody else in the world. Of course, it took the careless action of human beings to have this oil spill happen, and we can learn from that. We should learn from that. But if we dwell on the fault of others, then we cannot really effectively clean up the spill. And even though it was difficult work, I was impressed by the hundreds or thousands of people who have gone to volunteer on the West Coast, near Taeyang, near Malipo and Cholipo, to clean up the oil. This is actually a beautiful thing for Korean people, to go to the ocean and go to the beaches and the coast of their country and go down on their hands and knees and clean up the oil by hand. It's an act of faith, to put it mildly. It's a very wonderful thing. But in order to do that, we need to just clean without any assumption, without any gaining idea. What are we going to get from this? How much oil did I clean today? And somebody next to me said, the oil is endless. Even though we clean today, when the tide comes in, more oil is going to come in. More oil will be brought in. But what's important is not to have this gaining idea that, did I clean enough? just to clean, just to make that effort, to make that compassionate effort is the same as our Buddhist practice. It's the same that the patriarch has been teaching us. So the Bodhisattva, the Silla Sutra says that our true nature is intrinsically pure. Our true nature is pure. Why dwell on it? This is what the patriarch said. He said, why think about, a lot of people become obsessed with purity and obsessed with being clean or being pure. We say this is obsessive compulsive kind of disorder. There's even a name for it in psychology. Somebody's obsessed with being clean, and they're always cleaning their hands and always washing this. Of course, we also have this teaching in the West. We say cleanliness is next to godliness, or something like that. And so we often feel like it's you can't be clean enough, but we don't want to be obsessed with our purity, with our cleanliness. So the sixth patriarch says, why dwell on it? If we get rid of all our delusions, all our mistaken notions, then there'll be nothing but purity. That is our nature. So it's our delusions, our mistaken notions that cause us to feel impure. It's our mistaken ideas. And he says it's the delusive ideas that obscure the tathata, the suchness. Last time we talked about that. The suchness, the tathata, the just kind of the substance of things. So our true nature is pure by itself. And if we dwell upon purity, we are only creating another delusion, the delusion of purity. So here he makes it very clear that it's delusive to dwell upon purity, and that just makes another delusion. And he explains this in more detail. And he goes on to say that those people who train themselves for imperturbability, well, it's a different mouthful, imperturbability. Maybe I've been in Korea too long, I've forgotten how to speak English. But those who want to be imperturbable, they should ignore the faults of others in all circumstances. They should be indifferent to the merits or faults, goods or evils of others. For such an attitude accords with the imperturbability of our true nature. So this is a very noble kind of teaching that he's giving. He says we have to ignore the faults of others. That's one of the most difficult things to do, is to ignore the faults of others. We tend to be very good at finding the faults of others and ignoring the faults of ourselves. But he's saying that we should be indifferent to those faults of others and merits or faults of others, good or evil of others. And that attitude accords with our true nature. So somebody who's deluded will start criticizing others as soon as they open their mouths, even if they're unperturbed physically. They criticize the others and talk about their merits or demerits, ability or weakness, good or evil traits. This is very interesting because many times when I have meditation retreats at our Zen Center, we see this happen. That people who have studied Buddhism and who have done good things and also sometimes done volunteer work, when they actually come to do meditation, it's still very difficult. And one thing that happens is that when they sit down to meditate, the first thing they notice is the other people in the room, the person next to them, and what they're doing wrong. The person next to me is breathing too loudly, or they're moving too much. And then they go around the room, starting with the person next to them. They go around the room and find out what's wrong with everybody in the room. And one by one, they figure out the faults of everybody in the room. And this person's not sitting straight, and that person's leaning back too far, and that she's leaning on the right, and blah blah blah. And they go around the room and find the fault with everybody, and then they're exhausted. And finally, they get to themselves. They get back to themselves, and they find all the faults with themselves, and then they hate themselves. And it's very difficult to continue because they've criticized everything, and then they criticize themselves, and they can't see any good in anybody. So this is very common. I'm not describing one or two people. I'm describing most people. This is very common, and then the common thing at the end is the person decides they don't like themselves, but they're going to learn from the teacher there. So they fix their mind on the teacher there, and they find out what's wrong with the teacher and dwell on the faults of the teacher. And finally, the teacher has to skillfully show them that they're getting lost in their delusion, and they have to wake up. This is just very common. It's easier to say than to fix. It's not so easy to fix. But the sixth patriarch who lived many years ago, we're talking about 2,000 years ago, maybe almost 2,000, maybe 1,800 years ago, he understood this, and he said that we should be indifferent to the merits or the faults of others, and good or evil of others. And in order to walk the path, we need to stop criticizing others and stop talking about their merits or demerits and their weaknesses or abilities and good or evil traits. And we have to be careful not to dwell upon our mind or upon purity. This tends to be a trait more of the more advanced practitioner, is to dwell on their mind, to think about what is their mind, and where did their mind come from, and when did their mind first form, and what was their mind when they were a child, and what is their mind now, and when they die, what kind of mind will they have, and how big is this mind, how long has it been around, and what color is it, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. This is a trait of what happens when people get beyond thinking about the faults of others and thinking about criticizing others. Then they start to think about the mind, or they start to think about purity. That's more maybe monastics have that kind of trait. Think about, am I pure? Am I really a pure practitioner? Am I tainted by this world? Or am I truly a person who has become pure? This is all also delusion. This is setting up a kind of a scale that we try to measure ourselves and then try to measure others by. So this kind of delusion we have to throw away if we're going to really do meditation. If we truly can get out of delusion, then our pure and clear nature will be revealed. But we have to throw away delusion. And then he goes on the next page, 5.3, he goes on to say, learned audience, what is sitting meditation? In our school, it means no obstacles or hindrances without our mind giving rise to thinking, whether the outside circumstances are good or bad. This is what we call sitting. To meditate means to realize inwardly the imperturbability of our true nature. Yeah, so this is a point that many people miss when they first start doing meditation. They understand sitting the body, but they don't understand sitting the mind. So the Sixth Patriarch makes it clear that without our mind, true sitting meditation is without our mind giving rise to thinking. It doesn't mean that your body is just sitting. Your body can be sitting in a yoga position. You can sit like a yogi for 2 hours without moving. But that's not important to the Zen Patriarch. What's important is how well you have taken care of the deluded thoughts that cloud the mind. Deluded thoughts in the mind. Of course, I'm using the word mind, but we also don't want to dwell on the mind itself. Then we get into a psychological kind of game, and that's also not what he is teaching. So, without our mind giving rise to thinking, whether the outside circumstances are good or bad, that's what we call sitting. To meditate means to realize inwardly the imperturbability of our true nature. So this means not to have a non-moving mind, to have the center that doesn't move. So an example that my mentor and my teacher, Zen Master Sung San, often used to give is that it's like you have a scale, and the scale can weigh many different things. It can weigh up to several 100 kilos. It can weigh things. And you put something that's just a few kilos on the scale, and the scale that goes down. One of these mechanical scales that just, you put something on it and the scale is depressed that much, and you see the mark. This weighs 3 kilos. You put something on it. You put some book on it. That weighs 1 kilo. You put a person on it. That weighs 80 kilos. And the scale has a spring inside. The spring is very strong. So after you put the heavy object on the scale, the spring compresses and you can read off the number. Then when you take that heavy object off, whether it be a book or a person or whatever, when you take it off, the spring again expands. So the spring is a strong spring, means that scale can always return to 0, can always come back to its original position. But if the scale is not so good quality or it's not so strong, then after a few times of weighing things, the scale doesn't come back to 0. Maybe it comes back to 1 or 2, gets stuck there. Doesn't come all the way back. So we can compare our mind to that. So the imperturbable mind, or a simpler word is unmoving mind, is like that strong scale. Even though you put something heavy on it, it goes down, but soon comes back. It's not moved by circumstances. Even it has some good news or bad news, it still bounces back. This is what he's talking about. This not moving mind. The mind is not moved by good and bad, by external circumstances. And we all, of course, we wish for that. We wish that our mind would be imperturbable and not moving. But most of us find that unexpected circumstances, unexpectedly something happens, and then the scale goes kind of spring like breaks or goes crazy. We have problems. But if we are able to strengthen this spring and make it stronger, then even a heavy thing on this spring will not break it. The spring is strong, and so like a strong person's center, it can weigh heavy things and then return back to 0. So this is one example of how to understand this not moving mind, not moving, and actually he said not. He doesn't even say mind. He says imperturbability of our true nature. Our true nature is actually is not moving and still. Then he goes on to say, what are dhyana and samadhi? So now we have a new word coming in here, and this is samadhi. Those of you who are here before already heard me talk about samadhi. Samadhi is a Korean word. We can say samme or jong. Jong is like a concentration, some kind of like samadhi. And already I talked about this several times, but here he talks about, makes a distinguish between meditation. Dhyana means to be free from all attachments to outside objects, while samadhi means to attain inner stillness. So this samadhi is this inner kind of stillness, this not moving. If we're attached to outside objects, our inner mind will be perturbed. That's obvious. When we want something in the outside world and we're attached to getting what we want and we can't get what we want, we become disturbed inside, and our inner mind is not at ease. When we're free from attachment, our mind will be at peace. So when we don't attach to something, our mind's at peace, and our true nature is intrinsically pure and still. The reason we are perturbed is because we allow ourselves to be carried away by circumstances. The person who can keep their mind unperturbed, irrespective of circumstances, has attained true samadhi. So samadhi is like that quality of somebody who can go to this oil spill and without judging the people that were involved in the spill, without trying to find out who was wrong, who was at fault, just clean up the spill without judging those who were involved and judging the oil companies and the whole socio-economic thing, but just clean up the spill. That's the quality, we say, of this samadhi, this concentrated, not moving, imperturbable nature of ourselves. And we all have that. We all have that quality. And maybe somebody finds that it's difficult to concentrate. But if we continue to attempt to concentrate on a task and master that task, then we get more confident. A simple task, if we master it, we have more confidence that we can do it, and then our concentration can grow. But if we force our concentration, it doesn't grow. Pushing our concentration does not grow. So we cannot push too much. There's sometimes